I'm sure that whatever I try to write down will be a fairly cheap description of what a DMT breakthrough is like, and anyone who has had one will be able to agree right off the bat. They probably don't even need to read what I have to say because they've been there already. There is no explaining it, not in words. There have been so many little sayings that you hear, like, DMT finds you. Meeting God/your creator. If you're not sure whether or not you broke through, you haven't. The second is particularly true. I had obtained a bit of the stuff because I had really wanted to try it, but I can't say that I was in any way prepared to be confronted with what I found down there. I say down there because for me it is just easier. I would say I was mentally more prepared than a lot of people who first try. I wasn't approaching this as any kind of party drug or recreational high. I did get exactly what I came for though, I just didn't know it back then. First few tries was kind of with whack equipment and the stuff just kind of burned, and I got some neat visuals and even had what I thought was a deep experience where I more or less was able to experience emotions that I wasn't familiar with completely and met a very friendly fat furry cat. Also, those first 2 times I tried I did have a bit of guidance etc, but that was a parlor game compared to the breakthrough. The difference with the breakthrough hit was that I had a generally more positive experience in the actual taking of the substance. It was very much more enjoyable and not so acrid and disgusting as the first 2 times, since my delivery this time was a glass pipe and a nice fat flame on a piezoelectric lighter. I used about 30 milligrams each time, because supposedly you can back the dosage off in this pipe. I also had to reload the pipe for a second hit of that thick milky smoke because the first time it completely took me by surprise and I spat a fair bit of it out. On the second drawing of the pipe, where it was just starting to vaporize, I was already breathing it and feeling very spinny and disorientated and kind of getting those odd colors that kind of permeate from everything and the whirring siren in the ears, and then it went and I was well and truly on the way. The incredible thing I can say is just how layered the experience was. I recorded myself for about 20 or 30 minutes afterwards trying to explain it to my girlfriend, but probably just came across as a bit of a loony. On the layering, what I found incredibly profound was how strong and able to handle more information you become. When people say that it's over very quickly, maybe it is because I haven't done it again since writing this. Maybe you become more familiar or more able to navigate the space, but on that first voyage it really did feel like an eternity. Everything was just right, and I was pulled away from the mind that I was communing with just at the right time. How I would describe the thing in its entirety was layers of an onion that got bigger instead of smaller, just immense space and knowledge and understanding of the science and geometry and mathematics and physical properties of an entire universe, an incredible godlike surge of knowledge and control of everything I was taking in, but that was only granted to me once I became intimate with the entity, or the guide in that place. To say control of that reality is maybe wrong. I think a better word is an understanding that everything that happened to that reality was eventually going to be okay. I had no scores to settle. Just an entirely enveloping understanding of the space you were in, and then you hadn't even come into the relationship with the entity of that dimension yet. For those that have had warm experiences with their mothers, that feeling of complete acceptance and total trust and warmth and everything happy and confronting and non-ego about that relationship we have with our mothers is magnified indefinitely. I had that instant relationship and knowing with the entity the second it peeled back another layer and showed me the reality that was behind the one you saw and understood and had just been shown. And by shown, it was as if I became so aware of that dimension that I was completely in tune and able to understand the way things happened down to the last detail in that new place. I try not to make it sound as though it just makes you feel powerful. It completely didn't, it totally humbled me. I was then shown the nature of the next reality, and the next, each one becoming exponentially more amazing and perfect and completely non-contrived. It was like an infinite meditation with something that permeated every possible dimension and every possible outcome or thought that could potentially exist in any universe that a being could even have the capacity to think of being possible, even in the depths of their deepest spiritual experiences. That last bit was an attempt at illustrating the layering that I felt. Everything I did, every time I met God, it was a life-changing experience that went far beyond words, and then I met Him more. It was the same mind, but I simply went deeper into that communion with it. For me, this is a bad movie review that completely skips the plot. I met so many layers of this thing, and each time I felt that utter God bond that's why I describe a lot of it as infinite. The thing that I was last experiencing when I started coming out of it was what I could only describe as a deep dark blackness with purple lines barely visible on the sides of my vision. The lines were almost like patterns of a waterfall, except very neat and mathematical and understandable. That was just kind of its overflow, those lines. It was like maybe staring into a drain as it empties and seeing the water rippling and flowing on the sides. The purple shapes I saw were of no consequence compared to the blackness that I was exchanging emotions with. I felt like I had come all the way to Bowser's Castle or the Emerald City, all the way into the depths of the Matrix. But I knew that this could have almost just kept going, now that I think of it. Given how much of that feeling that I had every layer I experienced, I'm sure it could have just gone, all the same entity but all different dimensions that it can conceive of. Obviously, the language of the whole thing was in geometric shapes, that's sort of how I was communicated with. I had an incredibly deep understanding of what I was being shown because each layer or dimension would show me how to speak the mathematical/physical language of that particular reality. In terms of visuals, here is how I would put it. Each time I could have tried to visualize what was happening in a way that made sense to an outside listener, I might have said, which was, by the way, one strong visual I got, fat fluffy cat in a yellow raincoat. That description of that being in particular was only one possibility in that reality. By that logic, the Loch Ness Monster does exist simply because we have thought of it. The thought of it exists in our universe. Therefore, any kind of material object or thing that you visualized at a certain layer of the experience was only one straight possibility that could have emerged in the imagination of somebody in that entire universe. That's how my feelings were on it. It wasn't some freak show with these far-out creatures, it was being shown entirely new realities where those particular apparitions might only exist in the mind of some creature, or that the physical laws of that reality would allow for that thought to arise within it. Hearing a lot more people's experiences has been cool as well, but all I see honestly is people having trouble expressing themselves, just as I am. Even the ones who do this stuff a lot and try to talk about it a lot have real dramas even describing the first atom in one of these realities that you completely synchronized with, let alone being able to express what it's like to be able to actually walk the yellow brick road and meet the thing behind the curtain. The whole thing was so utterly moving and humbling and empowering and just plain over the top crazy that I could talk about it for years. And I think that that's what I've been looking for. Here are some closing things I said as I was coming down and trying to make some kind of sense of what had just happened to my consciousness. They need to have DMT journalists. It makes you aware of your own reasoning. Can you create something in your own mind that you are totally unfamiliar with? My first breakthrough experience with dimethyltryptamine was the most profound altered state of consciousness I've ever experienced in my days thus far. More intense than all my long-duration psychedelic tryptamine and phenethylamine experiences combined. Most of my psychedelic experiences have had moments, even hours of out-of-body properties to them when one induced a trance-like state, or practiced meditation, but I also have the ability to come back to your body at will in these states with compounds such as psilocybin, LSD, or 4-ACO-DMT. The reality DMT imposes upon the explorer is farther from conventional reality, and any psychedelic reality that I've ever experienced, and the amount of meaning it instilled in me left me confused, full of wonder, and reminded how much I don't know about time, space, and existence. I participated in the extraction of this compound and a laundry list of other alkaloids belonging to the mimosa root bark, and was quite satisfied with the outcome and purity of the material. White and crystalline, an extreme indicator of high-quality DMT. The correlation between DMT and visualization of dreams, birth, near-death experiences, and even death fascinated me to no end, and the undeniable safeness of this compound made me even more comfortable in exploring. The only thing my array of psychedelic experience prepared me for with this experiment, was the acceptance of what's going on, and the idea of losing control of my body, in a mind/body separation sense. Most DMT experiences are inexplicable in a sense, even more so than a normal psychedelic experience, but I will try to put the unspeakable into words. 50 milligrams of DMT was loaded into an oil burner in order to vaporize the material, and my companion was equipped with a torch burner to help me ingest. I held the oil burner in my mouth and watched as he vaporized the compound. It instantly melts into a puddle of slightly yellow-tinted, yet transparent liquid, and the oil burner fills with vapor. I slowly inhale, and 2 seconds in I can feel a body high reminiscent of large amounts of marijuana, definitely a stoning effect at this point. He continues to vaporize and by the second toke I can feel my body wanting to fly away, everything is shaking in my visual field. Exquisite alien patterns manifest themselves everywhere. The walls, the carpet, my arms, my legs, all have this beautiful hue that instilled the feeling of being in tune with everything. Along with my ego, the room and all the material inhabitants are dissolving from reality, everything in my field of vision has transformed into one beautiful and perfectly geometric dimension. I have never witnessed such a profound change in reality with any psychedelic, and this is the first time I've experienced the dissolvement of actual things in my field of vision. They were no longer there. The patterns don't seem familiar to anything my sense organs have ever perceived before, but I am engulfed in this amazing feeling of nostalgia, and I am aware I have experienced this before, somehow. By the third toke I can only see my friend in front of me. He's no longer an embodiment of everyday reality. As I look at him I observe a warm smile. I'm baffled at the amount of raw beauty energy pouring out of him. Something happened in these few seconds before my mind completely let go of my body, some sort of contact with an entity that used the person in front of me as a mediator. No words, no English, just feelings instilled into me from another place, and I could feel that it was coming from him. Everything is okay, try not to be astonished by this, don't give in to astonishment, you're going home, pay attention to what we show you. Not hearing, but feeling these instructions instilled laughter in my psyche. I could not understand how one could not be amazed by any of this, but I sat and waited, like an interested child in grammar school, very attentive. About 15 seconds have passed at this point, from first toke to observing the visual world, to the mediation. During my fourth toke the torch burner fails to light and my buddy quickly grabs a normal lighter and ignited the oil burner. It explodes with smoke and vapor, and before I can finish inhaling I feel myself leaving my body, floating upward at first and then being violently pushed through what most DMT explorers refer to hyperspace. The music being played in the room, which was beautifully melodic and extremely emotional, paralleled where I was perfectly. The music never sounded distorted or extremely enjoyable in a LSD or psilocybin auditory experience sense, it was as if reality was kind of showing me the beauty in its raw form. Though the music didn't sound different at all, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced from an auditory and emotional point of view. I could tell my mind was in a different place in respect to my body, because the music definitely sounded distant, as if it was coming from a completely different place. The vortex or tunnel I was flying through was filled with the most beautiful geometric patterns and grids. I traveled past these things too quickly to even take the time to observe anything. The amount of beauty in this place was unbelievable. I could feel my inner self, what I've gotten a glimpse of through psychedelic and meditation experience, more immensely than I ever thought possible. I was experiencing eternity, and it couldn't have been more ravishing or meaningful. As the song is dwindling to an end, I realize I am coming back to my body, just as rapidly as I left it. I open my eyes and watch things pop back into conventional reality very quickly, first the TV, then the laptop, then everything. My friend has left the room, unbeknownst to me, and he enters from his restroom door right as I glance in that direction. He is smiling and looking at me with a feeling of understanding, knowing where I just went. I am in complete awe of the experience, I cannot believe what just happened. The first question I mutter is, the first time I smoked DMT, were you playing that song? He gives me a confused look because this is the first time I smoked DMT with him, and I smile and say sorry I worded that wrong. It felt like I had experienced all of those moments before. I do not know what to make of this. I look at him and inform him that I feel like crying, and he instructs me to do so. I immediately start crying, tears having to do with every possible emotion one could have, tears of the beauty, tears at what felt like the truth, tears of enlightenment, tears of appreciation for being alive still, and tears for the love being shared in that room. I cried for only a few moments, and told him the beauty of that experience was astonishing, and almost too much to witness. I look up at him after I finish crying, and he has his arms wide open for me with a big smile, and we embrace. Great vibes indeed. As I get up from my sitting position, I feel as if I'm floating, and I make my way to the porch. The scene was beautiful, I enjoyed a cigarette, and then we were off to gift the DMT to a few friends. The rest of the day I could not get my mind off what happened. I am definitely going to revisit this compound. It is just beautiful. Intro. Ever since I was 15 years old I discovered drugs. I made a list off what seemed interesting. I soon discovered psychedelics, drugs that open the mind to new perspective. I made a list of what I would want to use and what not. I added DMT to my list of do's but was careful with it. I knew I could not just use DMT without preparation, and wisdom gained from lesser psychoactive drugs. I was only 15 years old and the idea scared me. For 6 years I grew used to the altered mind psychedelic drugs force on me. I started with marijuana, then next psilocybin mushrooms. I used them twice and lost control once. I knew I was not ready, I still felt scared. Last year I used LSD once, a low dose. I controlled it. So I knew it was time and I was exited to the idea of using DMT. So in the summer of 2013 when I was 21 years old I visited a good friend who had made me an DMT himself. It wasn't pure, he said, about 70% DMT and 30% chemical residue. He has been my friend for over 10 years, so he told me the risks truthfully and said, "So how about it?" I got scared and thought to myself, "Wait, what you mean now?" "Now," he said. He told me he tried using it himself but he has weak lungs. He couldn't hold the DMT smoke in long enough to break through, but he knew my lungs could take a lot more. He was right. I asked him, should we go outside to a park? He looked at me with a frown and said, "You sure you know what DMT will do to you? You won't be able to walk at all." I didn't really comprehend what that meant. I figured it was like being really high. So I asked him, should I light a joint during the DMT trip? Again he frowned and said, "My friend, you won't be able to do anything at all. You'll be gone, mate, gone from Earth." In retrospect, I don't think I knew what that meant. The room I was in was a student dorm, a small one, maybe 10 square meters. His room was decorated with psychedelic art and classy paintings. He played the Sacred Spirit album from his laptop and dims the light. I got really nervous and, to be truthful, more than a little scared. He told me, take 3 hits, full hits, keep it in your lungs for as long as you can. So I asked him for the pipe. He told me, "No, I'll hold it, you just hit it, now go sit on the bed, you'll fall down." So that's what I did. He took the pipe, most junky pipe I have ever witnessed in my life. It was a homemade plastic crack pipe. I looked at him and said, "Seriously?" He filled it with over 50 milligrams of DMT, excluding the residue that was still in the pipe, and preheated it. Smoke was coming out now and I was nerve-wracked. "Hit it," he said. On set. So I leaned closer and took a hit for over 3 seconds. The smoke was in my lungs for only 2 seconds and it hit me like a bulldozer. It tasted and felt terrible. The worst smoke I have ever had in my life. Like plastic burning in my lungs. I started to hallucinate heavily. Eyes were opening in the curtains, the wall started to vibrate. I could hear my friend say one more time, but I couldn't see him. His voice was heavily altered, like it was being played through a computer and being played with. The pitch was lower and it was like he talked in slow motion. So I hit it again. This time I was starting to get really dizzy and heavy. A faint noise was starting to arise in the room, much like sound distortion. I felt like I had trouble breathing now and starting sweating. I couldn't hear the music anymore and could barely see anything. But the sound distorting was getting louder. I knew I didn't have long. "One more time," he said. So I took a 3rd hit. And fell. I could hear him say, "One more time," and with all the strength I could muster I answered, "No. Enough." But it was like I just spoke in slow motion. The sound distorting was embracing me like a mother embracing her child. I felt strange. I didn't comprehend what was happening to me. What is this? Where am I? What happened? I asked all the when, why, what and how questions. I could still feel my body sweat, and it felt like my nose was bleeding, but I couldn't move, and slowly it was like I could feel the DMT move through my body, and everywhere it came it killed me. It was cold. I couldn't feel my arms at first. Then I couldn't feel my legs, and lastly I couldn't feel my heart and breathing. Coming up. I was alone in my mind and there was nothing but my thoughts. Thoughts I thought. Must be what death is like. Am I dying? Wake up, please wake up, please wake up. I didn't. I tried waking up for what felt like an hour. No good. Did I become my friend's experiment? Did he kill me? No, having a corpse in his bed would get him in serious trouble. Then I must have accidentally took too much. Yes, that's it, I took too much DMT. I am the first person dying on DMT. What a waste. There is so much I wanted to do with life. Sure, I wasn't always grateful for life, but did I want to die? No. What's that? A voice. You idiot, you are dying. You took too much. What would your parents say? There is a girl in your house expecting you to come home tomorrow, and know what? You'll never see her again. You will never have anything but your thoughts. But I tried everything. I tried waking up. Let's give up? Fine, let this be my end. My life would have been brief, but I lived my life the way I wanted to. I had a good life. The breakthrough. It felt like my conscious was being lifted from my dead body, and set at light speed through the universe. I kept going and going and going for what seemed like years. And then there was this dark place. And I had no physical form. I was the shattering of my ego. Thousands of pieces floating in space. My memories, my feelings, my ego. I played a piece of my memories. I relived it like it was happening at that very moment. I was a little boy walking to my mother on a sunny day. I was happy and wanted to be embraced with the love of my mother. It felt like I was starting to cry, but there was nobody to cry with. I relived moments of my life. My first kiss, meeting my first friends. Being bullied, my first fight. I felt everything. I started to get control over my shattered ego floating in space. My first thought was not where am I but when am I? I am no believer of reincarnation, but it felt like this is where souls go to wait for rebirth. And I felt a presence. He felt that I could feel his presence. It felt like a him, not a her. I wanted to meet him, and instead of moving through space, space moved around me and I started going forward. What I encountered next was beautiful. A floating ball of light. It was huge. Like a red giant in comparison to planet Earth, and it made colors and shapes with its tentacles of light. Millions of tentacles of light going everywhere. I saw colors and shapes I had never witnessed before. It was profound. Tentacles started going my way to my shattered ego. And when it touched me, I learned all the secrets of existence. Imaged flashed in my head: space, men, alien, gas, colors, murder, sex, TV, propaganda, the news, pain and suffering, technology, the past, the present and the future. The formula, the math behind existence became mine. And I realized all that is but perspective in an infinite large universe. I am God and I am man. I am the devil and I am the saint. All that I see and all that I feel is but my perspective. If men and women will ever live together in peace, we must understand that all that we feel is but perspective. Our greatest enemy is our ignorance. We kill and hurt because we don't understand. These people we kill and hurt are not bad, they are different. They have a different perspective. Western society has taught me prejudice, has taught me so-called good and wrong. But they are just one of many perspectives in the universe. And maybe, just maybe, no one is right, not even me. Coming down. I started to hear music and chanting. I could feel my body become whole again, and slowly I could feel the sweat on my face and the pain in my lungs. I opened my eyes and could see the eyes on the curtain stare at me. I felt very light and started to speak water. A man sat next to me. He was chanting and appeared to make a sign in the air, almost like he was conjuring up magic. His face was covered in a mask of light and color. It seemed familiar. He gave me water and kept chanting. His long blonde hair was swirling. It fascinated me, just like his chanting and signs. I drank. It felt good. The memories of my breakthrough started to come to me. I lay down on the bed and smiled. I felt great. I traveled and found truth. I could already feel it changed me forever. A familiar voice: "Are you okay? How was it?" he calmly asked. I was back. After effects. I am one of you. A perspective in this increasingly mad and dangerous world. But I hate no longer. Hate is for the unloved and the unnatural. In which our hero doses on methadone, smokes a large amount of cannabis, and then working his way up to a high dose of smoked DMT is forced to battle with a malevolent DMT entity who subjects him to a magical attack. This is an experience of smoking DMT while on the plateau and come down from methadone. The methadone was nice, empathic, euphoric, and stimulating. I had smoked a bunch of strong weed as well, and drank a little wine. I decided to smoke some DMT. I tried a few times but without too much success. I only managed to vaporize a little and had mild but interesting DMT trips. They were not unpleasant, although on one I did see a lizard alien type creature amid the closed eye hallucinations. I have seen them before, and though I think it is rather superstitious of me, it always slightly alarms me. For the most part, however, these experiences were slightly euphoric, transcendent, and pleasant experiences. But emboldened by the methadone, I thought that just wasn't enough. I put about 60 milligrams of DMT into the bowl of my bong on top of some weed, and vaporized most or all of it in 2 big hits. The high-dose DMT experience is utterly different than a moderate or low-dose experience for me. I crossed a threshold. My field of vision contemplated an empty black space in the center with morphing 3-dimensional geometric shapes gyrating on both sides. I remembered the high-dose DMT space and the fact that it transforms reality into something completely unrecognizable, though not necessarily beautiful or transcendent. In fact, for me, it is more likely to be colorful but somewhat flat, machine-like, and even cartoonish. I realized I was tripping extra hard, and that the experience was about to just take over completely. For just a second I wondered if this was going to be a breakthrough. I then felt myself being propelled forward at astonishing speed. However, I could tell that I was being propelled towards something I might not want to experience at all. My resistance and fear took hold. Within less than a second I saw my destination. It was the DMT Spirit personified as a female demoness. I have met her before, only once, on my first ever DMT experience, in which she welcomed me and told me she was the Queen of Spies. As I looked into her face with horror, her voice told me, "Welcome to your nightmare." With a rush, I was being sucked down into an experience that I had created for myself, or that the DMT entity had created for me. It was going to be my ultimate nightmare, tailor-made just for me. It looked like it was going to have a prosaic real-world theme, being tortured or something unpleasant, but transformed and reconfigured into the machine-like fractalizing cinematic totality of the high-dose DMT experience. Something within me revolted. I used my fear and willpower to direct myself away from the nightmare tunnel. I cleared an empty space for myself in my consciousness, and told the DMT entity or entities that I would not submit to this, that I had not come into their space for this experience, and that I sought higher goals, truth, not nightmare scenarios fractalized and engineered by hostile entities. Transcendence, not a sci-fi DMT horror show. I could now see a male DMT entity, or more properly at that time the DMT entity. He was not a tyke, or elf, or alien, but the spirit of the substance, a resplendent god, part South American indigenous deity, part futuristic machinic being. And he was angry. I had refused his gift, and possibly his woman who bore the gift as well. He roared at me, infuriated by my disrespect and refusal to go along with the evening's planned entertainment. Within moments I was subjected to what I can only think of as a magical attack. The DMT entity was breaking my reality into pieces, rapidly throwing things at my consciousness and essentially toying with me, showing me what he could do. I was afraid, but in some way I was also buoyed by my ability to withstand the attack and to have enough control to not have to submit to the nightmare scenario. As my consciousness splintered in my mind, I was able to word a simple phrase of resistance: "I don't care." This seemed to be the spell I needed to rob the DMT entity of his anger. He relented and the attack stopped. If I didn't care, what was the point? Still, I felt his displeasure at my lack of respect and cooperation. As suddenly as it started, it was over. I was back in my room. Less than 5 minutes had passed. I felt utterly drained, exhausted, disappointed, and confused. I seek insights from DMT, I seek beauty, I seek the otherworldly, the transcendent, the numinous. Instead I was taken over by a hostile and superficial experience, threatened with my personalized ultimate nightmare, and subjected to magical attack. I checked myself, and realized that overall I felt okay. I had survived without much consequence. An avid pot smoker, my forgetting skills are sharply honed, and I decided not to let this trouble me much further. But still, I wondered, if the DMT gods hate me, if I reject their gifts of nightmares, what can I expect from use of this substance in the future? I have been schooled that during a psychedelic trip one needs to relax, let go, and experience whatever the substance has in store for you. I think this is generally good advice. Maybe if I had been willing to let myself experience the nightmare, it would have ended with an experience of transcendence. Maybe I lost a valuable opportunity to face my own fears and conquer them. However, this experience also showed me something about control. Having control is not necessarily a bad thing. I also, for the first time, understood intuitively the shamanic use of icaros during ayahuasca ceremonies. Icaros are not just songs, they direct the ayahuasca experience. Maybe I needed an icaro of my own, as this entire experience occurred in silence. In any case, I will be more careful of set and setting before my next high-dose DMT experience. I'm writing this trip report a little less than a week after it happened. While the visions and actual experiences have faded greatly, I have been able to digest and better assimilate my trip with reality, or at least this reality. I'm also going to describe the night leading up to the trip, as I believe it has great importance. If you want to skip straight to the trip, I have marked where it begins. Pop. The sound of a giant balloon exploding briefly deafened my 3 friends, and I almost instantaneously, after a blinding light, brighter than any firework I've ever seen, burst through the edges of the closed door. No one speaks for a couple seconds. What just happened? Did the door just get struck by lightning? Yes, it must have, after all it is storming outside. But when we go check, the door and everything outside is completely fine, even the rain is starting to succeed. We contemplate the possibilities of what this intense flash experience could have been. Was it lightning? Was it a natural phenomenon? Was it only in our minds? What would have happened if we had been on the other side of the door? These thoughts are racing through everyone's head as we slowly come back to reality from the adrenaline rush. We had been preparing to leave for New Orleans when the lightning had struck our door. After everyone gathers their thoughts and nerves, we head out the door and get in my friend's car, anticipating a wonderful night in New Orleans. For some context, We're 4 college students around the ages of 19-20. For privacy's sake we'll say my friends' names are D, M, and N. We were going to New Orleans for a concert, and it's the Thursday before classes begin. The summer is drawing to an end and no one wants to admit it, but this will be our last night out and we want to make it a great one. We're also going to meet up with another one of our good friends who had been in Europe for 5 weeks. On the ride down we talk about our plans to hopefully find some acid. There is also some brief discussion about the elusive DMT, but there is no expectation of finding this drug anytime soon. The 1-hour drive to NOLA goes by extremely fast and before we know it we're at my friend's house, the one who just got back from Europe. It's a great reunion, we all share hugs and hop back in the car getting ready to head downtown. In the car there is some more discussion on the hope of finding psychedelics and we share stories from the past 5 weeks with our European traveler. We parked the car. The rest of the night doesn't need a play-by-play, but it was unusually great. We enjoyed some time outside in the French Quarter before heading to the show, and then once arriving to the bar indulged in some of the best hookah I've ever had. I saw some friends who I hadn't expected to see and everything seemed to be falling in place. The only thing we needed now was psychedelics. The crowd was starting to grow and the headliners were preparing to come on. Time to start the search. After some failed attempts I struck gold. While asking for acid someone said they had some Deemsters. I stared at them for about 5 seconds as if they were joking. Was this happening? Had I just found DMT? The universe seemed to be aligning and I was at the center, maybe it was the lightning. So I bought the remaining DMT that he had, which was about 2 grams, and enjoyed the rest of the show. The show was great, a ton of fun and best of all we were completely sober. We got to talk to the artists and enjoyed ourselves to the fullest. We head to our car once the show ended around 2 AM and start the drive home. I would usually be tired after dancing all night, but the anticipation of the DMT experience is keeping me awake. The drive home flies by faster than I ever could imagine, and before I know it I'm sitting on a beanbag in my living room holding a bowl of DMT. There was roughly about 0.04 g in the bowl. Am I ready for this? The answer truthfully is no, but I don't think I ever will be, so here it goes. The beginning of the trip. I take the first hit and hold it in for 10 seconds. So far so good. The second hit I do the same. At the exhale I notice that my entire body feels like it's glowing with warmth. I pass the bowl to my friend to hold the bowl while I take the third hit. I take it and immediately notice everything starting to move in a melting way, similar to acid visuals, but way faster and stronger. After inhaling I say fuck. Here it goes. I lay down on my beanbag as I exhale my third hit. I notice the carrier frequency and it starts to build with incredible speed. Then I notice that the warmth I felt before has become this frequency. This is the frequency of life, and it keeps building. As it builds the frequency and my body quickly moves up into my head. My head feels like it explodes and I break through. At this point I have no control over my body. I see beautiful geometric patterns and colors. Everything seems very cartoon-like. Everything was constantly moving but in an orderly way that I could never understand or comprehend. The only thing I could relate it to would be the intro to Saved by the Bell, with all the shapes and patterns moving over a colorful background. In no way was it like this, but it's the closest thing I can relate to. Visions seem to be folding in and out of each other. At one point I remember flying over a highway lit by streetlights being led by a ghostly entity. I also remember briefly seeing my body, and it looked like I was dead, or just really still. These visions were wonderful and beautiful beyond belief, but the speed that I encountered them it was overwhelming to say the least. I believe there were more visions during the time that I was in this realm. But similar to a dream I think I could only remember that last couple ones I experienced before coming back to this reality. Time doesn't exist in this realm. When I came out I expected about 30 minutes had gone by, and that was a conservative guess, when in reality only 3.5 minutes had elapsed. When I broke through, my body immediately tensed up. It's very similar to being paralyzed by fear. But there was no fear in this experience, only beauty in the most intense raw form. Being shot out of a cannon, while such a cliché comparison, is literally the best way to describe the experience. After the first 4 minutes the rush resides into a beautiful glow, the closed-eyed visuals recede to more tame and recognizable geometric patterns while open-eyed visuals are still very strong and acid-like. I lay down staring at the ceiling as the visual of an elephant with 9 heads is created among the texture of the ceiling. The trunks of the elephants are elongating and weaving in and out of each other forming a Celtic-like pattern as they reach for what I perceive as water or some life-giving substance. The movement of the trunks is very snake-like, but there is no negative connotation towards it. After 15 minutes the visuals subside and I'm baseline with a wonderful afterglow. I say I'm never doing DMT again, I lie. The first thing I notice is that a muscle in my back that's been bothering me for about a day is now throbbing. I'm too mentally exhausted to even give it much attention, so I let it slide as D prepares the bowl for his experience. I continue to lay on the floor as I try to digest what the fuck just happened. The strangest thing about the DMT experience is that it is so intense, but so fleeting. After an hour I had almost convinced myself that it didn't even happen. Everyone else takes their 3 hits separately and has their experience. No one's trip comes close to the intensity of mine, and they seem to have a much more comfortable experience. I can relate somewhat to what they saw and experienced, but the sheer intensity that paralyzed me isn't mentioned once among them. This is what causes me to doubt my experience, and I almost convince myself that I made it up. The pain in my back is almost unbearable and I ask my friend M to massage my back. It's about an hour after everyone had the trip, so about 2 hours for me. M is still massaging my back, I'm lying on my stomach, and I ask for the bowl. I plan on burning up the rest of the remaining bud that we had put below the DMT to make sure it didn't fall through. I expect to get mostly weed and maybe some cool visuals from a little DMT, but nothing comparable to my previous experience. I was wrong. I take 3 quick hits and immediately realize what I had done. The world starts to melt away and I realize that this dose is much higher than my previous one. Right after this thought crosses my mind, I'm immediately teleported back to this mystical realm and I lose all contact with my body. Memories of the first trip and possibly past deaths flood my brain. The feeling was very similar to the first trip, but there was an added electrical feeling, as if I was inside a lightning cloud. I could hear static charges all around me and I could even feel them in my body, but it wasn't painful. I didn't feel like I was actually getting shocked, but rather I felt full of electricity. The visuals this time were much more intense and had way more depth, an infinite amount of dimensions. The first trip felt like I was watching a 3D television, while this trip felt like I was actually physically in this alternate dimension. Once again I feel like I forgot many of the visions I had during this second trip, but the one that stuck with me was of a structure very similar to what you would see in a Dr. Seuss book. But it wasn't stationary, it was constantly being constructed and destroyed at the same time, as well as folding in and out of itself in infinite dimensions. Once again everything seemed very cartoon-like, but the colors this time around were focused heavily on green and purple. I briefly remember seeing a green entity, but it didn't have very distinct features. It was small and box-like, similar to a little tiki man, but nothing like it. He seemed to be riding this structure as if it was a wave. He came into my vision and then left immediately. A flash of the divine. My body is lying face down on the ground. When I open my eyes, the lack of depth in the floor seems to fly up and slap my face. I realize how flat this world is in comparison to the depth of the DMT realm. Once again the experience inside the alternate realm lasted about 4 minutes. The come down was similar to the first trip, but this second experience had affected me way more than the first one. After 20 minutes I was baseline, but this afterglow is completely blissful. This second trip leaves me lost for words. I try to explain, but nothing seems to capture my sense of awe. It's about 6 in the morning, we smoke some weed and go get some breakfast. In the car I spontaneously yell, "I feel amazing." Hero would note, driving while intoxicated, tripping, or extremely sleep-deprived is dangerous and irresponsible because it endangers other people. Don't do it. My friends find this funny, but truthfully I feel better than I ever have in my life, and I don't feel like I'm on drugs. I feel more sober than I've ever been. After breakfast my friends D and N go back to their place to sleep while M and I stay up listening to some music and slowly pass out. I get about an hour of sleep and before I have to get up and go to work. Waking up is rough and I'm not looking forward to working, but it must be done. I take a shower and head out the door. Work goes by extremely fast. I seem to be in the best mood ever and I'm extremely friendly even to complete strangers. I'm usually pretty reserved around people I don't know, but today I'm very calm and friendly, willing to talk to anyone about anything. I realize that the lessons you learn from the DMT experience don't necessarily come from interpreting the visions and visuals, but rather from your reaction to the experience. How you respond to this intense flash experience is the lesson learned. As the day goes on I notice a large amount of ego loss, the most I've ever experienced. I seem to have no opinion on anything, just understanding. I don't feel happy nor sad, but rather joyful, blissful, content. After a week, I'm still in this amazing mindset. It has diminished greatly compared to the day immediately after the experience, but I still have a very egoless perspective. I also feel almost divinely guided, as if everything in my life is and always has been leading up to the now in the most purposeful way. I am eternally grateful for DMT. It is definitely not a drug to be taken lightly and should be given the utmost respect. I don't think I will try it again anytime soon, for I feel I still have much to learn from these two intense experiences. This report is already longer than I had anticipated, so I'm going to go ahead and end it, but there is so much more that I couldn't put into words. My advice for anyone taking DMT is to have no expectation. I did not expect to trip the second time, and I believe this lack of expectation let me go much deeper into the trip and let me truly experience it. Also, don't think, after I took the third hit, I sat back and just experienced. I had time to process after you come out. In my first trip I was almost too aware of everyone watching me, and I believe this took me out of the trip somewhat. I don't know if the lightning strike was divine intervention or a flash of the DMT trip to come, but I am sure that everything happens for a reason, and that reason is because it happens. I hope this report is helpful. Peace, love, and understanding. I smoked DMT the other afternoon and remembered that everything really is okay. It may be a struggle to realize that at times, but this would only be due to what I may impose upon the limitations of my consciousness. So, I may as well recount this recent memory of eternal unburdening before the accrual of personal consciousness obscures me of the bigger picture. Here it goes. I waved goodbye to my roommate, feeling a body load swiftly build upon me. I cleared the rest of the smoke as I could, and put the empty bong down. A shimmer was noted, in everything I saw, in each and every point of my environment. Geometric images of manifold designs began to appear and move along every alignment possible. I closed my eyes, pondering how the world my eyes perceived was but a narrow portion of the real world that my sensory apparatus could detect, moments after that real event had actually occurred. My eyelids closed to shut out the world limited by them, and my mind was subsumed into direct experience of a reality beyond my comprehensions. I did not see a cosmic elf trying to gift me, or feel hugged by the clouds, as my roommate had recounted his own experience on the chemical. I did, however, completely lose my body. Aware only of my vision, smile and physical feeling of infinitude, I was not otherwise contained. I was a part of the world, reflecting on itself. The world was more vast than imaginable, yet simplified enormously. A bright, luminous sun glowed no more brightly than the green hills that the sky sloped into. Noting a sensation of encapsulation, it seemed I was as central to this sphere as any other point within it. My world and sky were one. This world did not exist for me with machinery, as many DMT smokers may report, and had actually lacked all angles as they had been known to me. The curvature was sublimely unending, a dynamic unfurling of luminous wonder. If angles were to be conceived, it was as a vector may, each point I would reflect upon would sparkle, as though a hologram. This seemed to be the arising between the intersection of worlds. Yes, this was a place primordial to time of consequence, yet a place of confluence where these, and all other things, passed inconsequentially through each other. This world laughed at my sense of cause and effect. Referred to as the businessman lunch due to its metabolic brevity when smoked, I had 45 minutes to burn until baked potatoes needed interference. I thought nothing before experiencing the DMT. This silly thought, of a responsibility aside from wonderment of which I was an inextricable part, intruded my appreciation of this world. The potatoes, some stubborn part of my lucid mind would assert. I would open my eyes to see the digital clock suspended within the well-intended mockery of the realer world. Of course my roommate would be responsible, if need be, for me. The entire arch of my trajectories from and to, presuppositions of cause and effect, was undermined by the immanency and utter depth of the world beneath it. It is okay, the world would remark as the conscience of my guilty self. Is okay, was okay, will be okay. Okay is eternal, and this joy is ever flowing, this world would calmly whisper. A black field. I am ensconced, but know of nothing other than vision. I see black. Then, and I am sure for this happened several times, so similar, but never identical, the most adorable, invitingly free, bipedal creature that I had ever seen walks from right to left. Best resembling a lemur or other prosimian animal with supernaturally cute features, this object of my endearment walks, from right to left, with purpose. Before reaching its destination, it looks to its left and meets me in the eye. This is where things unexpected enter. The animal astounded by the creature's reaction. It looks at me with astonishment, clear from its physical and facial reactions. I recognize that look. The creature bounds over to me, kneels down and begins to pet me as though I am the most adorable creature it has ever beheld. Although hands, feet and body in general had ceased to exist for some time now, I was aware of this creature's enfolding embrace. It felt so good, to be pet and loved as I loved so much. My insides were utterly tickled. The smile I wore seemed larger than all space. My grin seemed to wrap around my everything, keeping me warm. This happened several times. In each rendition the Muppet projection of myself diverted from its straight and narrow path to love the unexpected beauty it had nearly passed. My breath was realized, for what seemed the first time in ages. It felt so good, to simply aspirate. To take in the world, my eyes still closed, to breath in my environment I became more myself. I and environment were not so separate. My legs returned, and I felt my seat. The grin, though still cast wider than the horizon, could be localized to my cheeks. I began to talk with my roommate, first uttering thank you and I love you. My life was changed, like a born-again Christian, a dear friend justly summarized for me. The world beneath my fingertips, tapping on a keyboard, playing a violin of the cilia in my ears with the vibrations of the air, sliding down my nose in the form of prescription glasses, my sense of what is important in the context of things, everything I feel to be real in the world of death and taxes. None of this is more compelling than that richer realm facilitated through DMT. This world is simply more accessible than that other world, but no more real to my mind than the other. Going back to my last cogent thought before the chemical took hold entirely, my real world, composed of dear people known and unknown to, but entirely a part of, myself is a sliver of the past. Vibrations of sound traveling through the air, a photon's journey from the event to my eye, even the sensations of my very skin are delayed as they are transmitted to the awareness of my mind. Our window is too narrow to take it all in, and the grand breeze of what is will not hit us until squeezing through the prison of our subjective removal from reality. We won't know what is going on until it becomes a fragmentary history, distorted by our conclusions of it. This is what is so accessible, a set and capable of inducing conclusions of how wide an array existence may take. I think the DMT communication, if you will, or lesson that I construed was that joy and infinite astonishment, a deep and fluid indivisiveness of being at its grandest, lays beneath all moments in time. I don't fear death, nor speculate what may come after it. Perhaps reincarnation, hell, or nothing at all. Whatever it may be, it seems incapable of circumventing the juncture DMT brought my mind to, a palatial crux of all things from which only itself can arise. Now, what is so important? DMT is probably the most mysterious drug known to man. Very few people that I speak to know anything about it, and fewer still have tried it. And if you haven't tried it, you can't possibly be expected to understand it. Thus it is also an extremely misunderstood substance. I would rather refer to it as a substance rather than a drug, because in my mind, it is quite frankly, a magical substance. The word drug can be used to define pretty much any chemical compound, but I have trouble grouping any psychedelic drugs in with drugs like heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, or even prescription drugs like painkillers or antidepressants. The so-called psychedelic compounds, such as psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, peyote, mescaline and DMT, are non-addictive drugs, and each in its own way tends to steer the user towards a deeper and more useful understanding of life. Of course, individuals who do not understand their true value, and consume them as recreational drugs can abuse them, but education could do a lot to change that. Unfortunately, the powers that be, and the media have painted all drugs with the same brush ever since the emergence of psychedelic drugs in Western culture in the 60s. What the general public and a great many supposedly educated individuals are unaware of, is that psychedelics are profoundly important compounds, worthy of intense research and study. And none more than the spirit molecule, DMT. For the last 500 years, Western culture has suppressed the idea of disembodied intelligence of the presence and reality of spirit. 30 seconds into the DMT flash, and that's a dead issue. Terence McKenna. There are countless places where one can read about DMT online, and in bookstores. I will leave it to you the reader to pursue these readings if the spirit moves you. I don't want to provide countless links to DMT information here, I only wish to relate my own personal experience with it. In my mind, DMT is not so much a drug as it is a spiritual conduit, a portal to the fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on, dimensions. There are lots of theories about the DMT experience. I don't wish to theorize too much, although I do get to that eventually. I can't help myself. And experiencing these phenomenon firsthand, I'm not so sure it is theorizing. My experience, I hope, speaks for itself, and my ideas as to what is actually happening, well, they are my ideas, That's all. Once upon a time, almost 20 years ago, I sat cross-legged on the floor of our small extra room, in a Hollywood Hills bungalow where I lived in the early 90s. With me was a close friend and fellow spirit traveler, who I will call Ari. Ari had with him, a small amount of powdered DMT. For months prior to this moment, I had been listening to lectures about DMT, and reading everything I could get my hands on about this incredible drug. I had been to see Terrence McKenna speak in Ventura, California, and he touched on his experiences with DMT. A longtime psychedelic traveler, having taken hundreds of carefully staged psychedelic drug trips myself, I felt as ready as I could possibly be, to try DMT and attempt to punch through the thin membrane of what we call reality into DMT hyperspace. Ari held up a small, clear glass pipe, loaded up with approximately 50 milligrams of pure DMT. As he held butane lighter underneath the pipe, you could see the powder melt quickly into a pool of yellowish fluid. Shortly, the fluid began to vaporize, and thick white smoke began forming in the round receptacle of the pipe. I began to inhale. I have heard that many people have a tendency to cough when they first feel the DMT smoke hitting their lungs. I had no such tendency, having seemingly cast iron lungs, and although the smoke did taste strange and slightly harsh, I had absolutely no trouble keeping the smoke down. As far as I can remember, I completely emptied the pipe of its contents. All the 50 milligrams of DMT was vaporized and inhaled into my lungs, and I held it in, as long as I could, and then gently exhaled the strange, slightly plastic-tasting smoke. Almost immediately, after only seconds, an intense buzzing vibrational sound began to well up, as if coming from inside me, and yet enveloping me from the outside as well. The intense vibration could be heard and felt, and then tasted as well, and then seen, as everything in my field of vision began to vibrate intensely, as if pulsating waves of electric energy were emerging from within the very matter all around me. I looked directly into the eyes of Ari, who was shirtless, sitting in the lotus position in front of me, smiling mischievously. As our gazes met, the most intricate and beautiful fractal patterns began to spread across his face and body, like morphing, animated tattoos on his skin. The familiarity of these designs on his skin was amazing to me, as if I had always known they were there. It is hard to explain how something so foreign to our everyday waking life could seem so utterly familiar, but that is the best way I can explain it. Watching Ari's flesh crawl with these gorgeous, constantly changing and growing patterns was, if anything, extremely calming and reassuring to me, and I felt warm layers of loving energy enveloping me as I watched this energy spread to everything in the room. At this point, the effects accelerated very quickly. What was simply a tapestry of unfolding geometric light patterns emerging from everything around me, became the only thing I could perceive, as it completely overwhelmed my surroundings. And as the form and geometry of the familiar room left me, the new geometry began to unfold layer after layer of laughing, giggling, incredibly lively beings, that unfolded themselves from the geometry, greeting me with enthusiastic cheers. I use words like cheers very loosely. Nothing sounded like anything I had ever heard before, just as nothing looked like anything I had ever seen before. These beings appearing all around me, buzzed and crackled with noise and energy that was like musical vibratory language, which, while being completely new to me, was once again, completely, 100% familiar and reassuring. I seemed to understand them, as it were. The way in which these entities unfolded themselves from the multidimensional fabric from which they emerged was astounding. It was as if they pulled themselves out of three-dimensional envelopes that were laid flat within the walls of the now living chamber of electric color and light that now surrounded me. As they unfolded, their appendages, arms and legs, heads and faces all seemed to roll in and around upon themselves, self-transforming constantly, in what can only be described as 4 or 5 or even 6 dimensions of liquid light matter. Their demeanor was profoundly jovial and welcoming, and they seemed to clamber over each other towards me, each wanting desperately to share his/her/its magical abilities with me. The language with which they communicate with me is made of pure light wave vibrations, thought, sight, smell, touch, taste, all involved in the transmission of information. And so, as this trip progressed, the countless wonderful, hilarious, animated self-transforming liquid light energy creatures vied for my attention. They pulled things into existence, as if from pockets of vacuum space within themselves, like beautifully jeweled liquid light revolving eggs, that transformed into and out of themselves like rolling smoke infused with layer after layer of brightly colored electrical information. Hieroglyphics, fractal in nature, unfolded endlessly from everything, pouring into my view with beautiful sounds and vibratory waves. Some of the entities held out what looked like tickets, or small flash drives, very close in front of my eyes for me to look at. Check this out. They giggle, look, carefully, See what this is, remember it. This is how it all works, they seem to say. The objects looking like flash drive tickets seem to be information storage devices, full of infinite potential. But then, everything in this unfolding phantasmagorical liquid web world around seemed to be infused with pure energy and potential. As quantum physicists tell us, everything around us is. In this place, the very atoms and particles that make up the world around us, reveal themselves to us for what they really are. Not solid objects at all, but buzzing, whirring, living things made up of waves of pure information, intelligence and language. Imagine. It is there for us to see. And it loves us, and it wants to share its information with us, it wants us to join it. As atoms, molecules, waves and particles act as attractors to each other and build the blocks of life all around us, we are one with this energy. It is what we are made of. There is no separation. We are not in any way separate from the matter all around us. The only thing that separates us is the idea of matter. My beautiful, playful, mischievous self and brethren implore me to look, and to see, and to remember. At this point in my short journey, it has probably been about 5 or 10 minutes since I inhaled the DMT smoke into my lungs. And as strangely and beautifully as the entities all around me appeared, they begin now, to recede back whence they came. But the way in which they do this, is one of the most fantastic and memorable aspects of the experience. They actually all start waving and saying goodie and time to go, nice seeing you, love you and such sort of thing, as they comically start folding back in upon themselves. Once again they implore me to check this out, isn't this cool? As they pull off this wonderful magical trick of folding themselves in layer after layer of glowing, vibrating waves of electrical light, back into the surrounding spatial structure, which itself begins to glow, hum and whir, less and less, as it returns to the room around me that I started out in. Slowly, but quickly, as if that makes any sense, the sweet, generous little beings fold themselves back into the wall, pulling appendages up and into themselves, folding up in cute little fetal positions as they lay down, back into their little envelopes of informational energy. They recede. The walls around me, made of pure liquid light energy, gently return to their previous state. Solid walls of plaster, paint, and tacky wooden siding. My friend Ari, is there where he was, sitting bemused in his lotus position, eyes inquiring, how was it my friend? This all happened to me, almost 20 years ago. This is the first time I have been able to put it into words to a degree that satisfies me even remotely. And for the record, I have to say, these memories are as if it all happened just this morning. I am not embellishing or adding to the experience to my knowledge, in any way. If anything, it is a simplified and dumbed down version of an experience that one can only think of as life-transforming. As I write these words, the experience is fresh, and clear, clearer than ever. I didn't even find the time to mention how, during the voyage, when I heard my wife, who was in the next room speaking Czech on the telephone, I could see her words, and understood every word she said. I do not speak a single word of Czech, and I could hear the other person on the line, in Czechoslovakia, as if she was in the same room as well. I heard that the next room was not the next room but an adjacent space separated only by particles of pure light wave energy. I remember clearly, as I saw my wife's words enter my field of vision, that I uttered the words "I see what you mean." We can all listen to the theories about quantum physics and sort of understand that every atom is a whirring group of electrically charged particles and waves in perpetual motion, filled with information. It all kind of makes sense in a very strange way. We try to wrap our minds around the idea that the solid objects all around us are not at all solid, but mostly space. And that space is filled with information. And here is a substance that shows us this energy, all those whirring, buzzing particles and waves of energy that quantum physicists describe to us. Suddenly, with nothing more than a minor chemical tweaking of our neurotransmitters and receivers, the entire universe of quantum physics comes sharply into our view. And what a surprise it is to find that these particles are highly conscious and self-aware, and that they are enthusiastic and happy to see us. They want to show us how it all works. Immediately they rush to show us how with nothing more than intention these particles can transform and mutate into any form that they wish. The energy that they are alive with contains within it the very language of creation, the code, the electronically charged quantum chaotic mathematics that enables all life to exist in the universe. And when we are in that space where we can see it, and it can see us, information is exchanged at a furious rate, as every particle reveals itself to us, and does its best to show us what is going on there. Atoms and particles, after all, as many physicists will tell us, are incredible little bundles of information, that perpetually interact with other atoms and particles, exchanging information, building life, forever transforming into whatever the surrounding environment's intention puts forth. What a blessing, what a privilege, to be able to see this firsthand, and communicate and exchange information with these entities. In another experience of mine, more recently, I was looking at my cat, Frank, as the magic unfolded, and the physics of molecular, atomic revealed themselves to me yet again. The cat's whiskers became incredibly complex buzzing antennae, in which I could see beautifully unfolding mathematical code, the language of information, both entering the cat's whiskers and emanating from it, in pulsating waves of spectacular activity. To describe the depth and beauty of this code and activity, is impossible with the language skills I possess. It seems to work in more than 3 dimensions, the dimensionality of it is 4, 5, or 6-fold, like computer graphics of unimaginably detailed and colorful liquid linguistic hieroglyphics stacked together in an interweaving structure, all of it glowing, buzzing, and constantly transforming and outputting tremendous amounts of energy and information. Another prominent feature of this incredible experience is the interweaving of the senses, the incredible crossover of the sensory inputs that we usually perceive as independent of each other. Suddenly we can see sounds, and hear colors. We can see smells, and touch ideas. Thoughts immediately become things as our intention bonds with the surrounding environment of pure energy. Sight, smell, hearing, touch, intuition, logic, all our senses and thought processes become one incredible information processing device, capable of interacting with the conscious universe of quantum physics all around us. It is important to note here, that the feelings I had during these incredible exchanges, were of absolute joy. I had never felt more welcome in any environment I have encountered in this life. This is not to say that there was not a slightly scary aspect to it all. After all, this is stranger than being at the bottom of the ocean, and one has no idea at all what to expect next, but somehow, the surrounding energy infused me with a sense of being safe and deeply loved. There is what I will call dark matter at play here as well, but I could see, from my perspective, that this dark matter is simply part of the building blocks of the quantum reality. The pure liquid light energy that seemed to flow all around me, fuses with the dark matter that occupies the spaces in between its energy particles, and then intention becomes reality as it unfolds. As long as the intention is good, the reality is good. I would not want to experience such energy with anything but good intentions. I have a sneaking suspicion that this dark matter, if coupled up with fear or bad intentions, would give rise to all sort of hellish manifestations. But that does not matter to me. Fear and bad intentions play no part in this story, as well they should not.